Good morning students. Today we are going to study a new chapter called as friction. But I've seen driver of a car or a truck slowing down the vehicle at a traffic signal. You too slow down the bicycle whenever needed by applying brakes. Have you ever thought why a vehicle slows down when the brake are applied? And you can also do another thing which is when you make a ball to move on the floor, roll on the floor, the ball stops after some time. Why does the ball stop after some time? Not only vehicles, any object moving over a surface of another object all slows down when no external force is applied. Why do we slip when we step on a banana peel? Why is it difficult to walk on a smooth, wet floor? You saw that if you apply the force along the left, friction acts along the right. Apply the force across. These all things happen due to a force called as frictional force. So, ಈ ಮೂವ್ ಆಗ್ತಾರೋ ಬಾಲು ಸ್ಟಾಪ್ ಆಗೋದು, ಆಮೇಲೆ ನಾವು ಬ್ರೇಕ್ ಹೊಡೆದಾಗ ಸೈಕಲ್ ನಿಲ್ಲೋದು, ನಾವು ನಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಹೋಗೋದು, ಇದೆಲ್ಲನೂ ಒಂದು ಫೋರ್ಸ್ ಇದೆ. ಆ ಫೋರ್ಸ್ ಹೆಸರು ಫ್ರಿಕ್ಷನಲ್ ಫೋರ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ. ಏನು ಫ್ರಿಕ್ಷನಲ್ ಫೋರ್ಸ್ ಅಂತ. ಫ್ರಿಕ್ಷನಲ್ ಫೋರ್ಸ್. You saw that when you apply force along the left, friction acts along the right. You apply force along the right, the friction acts along the left direction. In both cases, the force opposes the motion of the book. The force of the friction always opposes the applied force. The force of the friction always opposes applied force. In the above activity, the force of friction between the surface of the book and the surface of the table. Factors affecting friction. In which case the distance covered by the minimum. Why is the distance covered by the pencil different from every time? Try to reason out why. Does the distance covered depend upon nature of the surface on which the cell moves? Could the smoothness of surface of the cell also affect the distance travelled by it? I shall try an activity by wrapping a piece of sandpaper around the cell. So activity, make an inclined plane on the floor. You may use wooden board. Put a mark with the pen at point A on inclined plane. Let the pencil cell move down from this point. How far does it move on the table before configuration? Note down the distance. Now spread a cloth over the table. Make sure there are no wrinkles in the cloth. Try the activity again. In which case the distance covered the minimum. Why is distance covered by the pencil different every time? This is all due to frictional force. Frictional force. Friction is caused by irregularity in two surfaces. In contact, even those surfaces which appear very smooth have large number of minute irregularities on them. Irregularities on the two surfaces lock into one another. When we attempt to move any surface, we have to apply a force to overcome interlocking. On rough surfaces, there are larger number of irregularities, so the force of friction is greater if rough surface is involved. Friction is caused by irregularities on the two surfaces in contact. Even those surfaces which appear very smooth have a large number of minute irregularities in them. Irregularities on the two surfaces lock into one another. When we attempt to move any surface, we have to apply a force to overcome interlocking. On rough surfaces, there are large number of irregularities, so the force of friction is greater than force is involved. We know that friction is caused by interlocking of irregularities in the two surfaces. It is obvious that the force of friction will increase if two surfaces are pressed harder. You can experience it by dragging a mat when nobody is sitting on it or when a person is sitting on it. Recall your experience when last time you moved a heavy box from one place to another. You have no such experience. Get that experience now. What is easier, to move a box from rest or move a box which is already in motion? The force required to overcome friction at the instant an object starts moving from the rest is a measure of static friction. Other hand, the force required to keep object moving with the same speed is a measure of sliding friction. When the box starts sliding, the contact points on its surface do not get enough time to lock. So the sliding friction is slightly smaller than the static friction. You find somewhat easier to move the box in motion than it is already got. So different type of frictions are there. First is static friction. The frictional force present between an object at rest on the surface is called static friction. Sliding friction is a kind of friction where the object is already moving. And the box starts sliding. Third, friction and necessary evil. Recall some of your experiences. Is it easier to hold a kulhar or a glass tumbler? Suppose the outer surface of the tumbler is greasy or has a thin layer of cooking oil. It would be easier for you to hold or difficult? It would be difficult. It is also difficult to move on a wet muddy track, wet marble floor. Can you imagine being able to walk at all if there is no friction? You could not write with pen or pencil if there were no friction. The teacher is writing the chart. Its rough surfaces rub off some of the chalk particles which stick to the blackboard. Could it happen if there were no friction between chalk and the board? So friction is a necessary evil. We walk because of friction. We walk because of friction. We fall when we step on a banana phrase because there is no friction. How difficult is it to move on a wet muddy track, a wet marble floor? If an object started moving, it would never stop if there were no friction. Had there been no friction in the tire of the automobiles and road, they could have not started or stopped or turned to change the direction. You could not fix a nail to the wall and tie a knot. Without friction, no building could be constructed. Friction is so important that there would have been no movement of automobiles if there would have been no friction between the road and automobile tire. They could have been stopped or turned the direction to change the motion. You could have not fixed a nail on the wall or tie a knot. Without friction, no building could be constructed. Other than friction is evil. Friction is an evil too. It wears out the materials, whether they are screws, ball bearings, soles of shoes, must have been worn out of steps of foot over bridges at railway stations. Friction can also produce heat. Vigorously rub your palms together for a few minutes. How do you feel when you strike a match figure and it catches fire? You might have observed that the jar of a mixture becomes hot. When it is run for a few minutes, you can cite various examples from which friction produces heat. Increasing and reducing friction. Increasing or reducing friction. As you have seen in the previous section, friction is desirable in some situations. Have you ever thought why the sole of shoe is grooved? It is done to provide shoes better grip on the floor so that you can move safely. Similarly, the treaded tires of cars, trucks and bulldozers provide better grip on the ground. We deliberately increase friction by using brake pads in the braking system of bicycle. But when you are riding a bicycle, the brake pads do not touch the wheels. But when you press the brake lever, these pads arrest the motion of the rim due to friction. The wheel stops moving. You might have seen that kabaddi players rub their hands with soil for better grips of their opponents. Gymnasts apply some coarse substance on their hands to increase the friction for better grip. In some situations, however, friction is undesirable. We would want to minimize it. Why do you sprinkle fine powder on the carom board? You notice that when a few drops of oil are poured on the inside of the door moves smoothly. A bicycle or a motor mechanic uses grease between the moving parts of this machine. In the all above case, we want to reduce friction in order to increase the efficiency. When oil or grease or graphite is applied between the moving part of the machine, a thin layer is found and moving surfaces do not directly rub against each other. Interlocking of irregularities is avoided to a great extent. Movement becomes smooth. The substances which reduce friction are called lubricants. The surfaces which reduce friction are called lubricants. In some machine, it may not be advised to use oil as a lubricant. An air cushion between the moving parts is used. An air cushion may be used to reduce friction. What I have seen attached piece of luggage filled with rollers. Even a child can pull such piece of luggage. Why is it so? Because take a few pencil. It is always easier to roll than slide over a body another. That is the reason it is convenient to pull a luggage fitted with rollers. Can you now understand why the wheel is said to be one of the greatest inventions of mankind? Since the rolling friction is smaller than the sliding friction, sliding is replaced in most machines by rolling. Use of ball bearings. Common examples are use of ball bearings between ups and axles of wheeling, fans and bicycles. If you put a roller, it will be helpful. Rolling friction is smaller than the sliding friction. Sliding is replaced in most machines by rolling by use of ball bearings. Common examples are use of ball bearing between ups and axles of wheeling and bicycles. Fluid friction. You know that air is very tight and thin, yet it exerts frictional force on objects moving through it. Similarly, water and other liquid exert force of friction when objects move through them. In science, the most common name of gas liquid is fluids. So we can say that fluids exert force of friction on objects in motion through them. A frictional force in an object in fluid depends upon speed with respect to the fluid. The frictional force also depends upon the shape of the object and the nature of the fluid. Obvious that when objects move through fluids, they have to overcome friction acting on them. In this process, they lose energy. Efforts are therefore made to minimize friction, so objects are given special shapes. Where do you think the scientists get hints for these special shapes? From nature, of course. Birds and fishes have to move about in fluids all the time. Their bodies must have developed a shape which would make them lose less energy in overcoming friction. You read about these shapes in class 6. Look carefully at the shape of an aeroplane. In fact, all vehicles are designed to have shapes which reduce fluid friction. Reduce fluid friction. A rolling ball stops because of frictional force. We are able to walk because of frictional force. Frictional force is the force applied by the surface on an object moving on it. A moving ball stops because of frictional force. Next, types of frictions. Static friction is between two objects which are at rest. Sliding friction is where when object is made to slide over another object. Rolling friction is one where one object rolls on another. Liquid fluids have special shapes, objects and vehicles have special shape to prevent fluid frictions, prevent fluid frictions. First in the burner, students. First, what is frictional force? Types of friction. Factors affecting frictions discussed. There are many things which affect the friction. Number one is the type of surface. Number two is the speed of the object is at rest or it is moving on. Friction is caused by irregularities on the surface, two surfaces in contact. Even those surfaces which appear very smooth have a large number of minute irregularities on them. When we attempt to move any surface, we have to apply a force to overcome interlocking. On rough surfaces, there are larger number of irregularities, so the force of friction is greater if a rough surface is involved. We see that the friction caused by interlocking of irregularities, it is obvious that the force of friction will increase. Two surfaces are pressed harder. Recall your experience when last time you moved a heavy box. Friction is a necessary evil. Why? Because it is easier to hold a kulhar than a glass tumbler. Suppose outer layer of the surface is greasy, would it become easier for you to hold? Well, it is very difficult to move on a wet, muddy track because there will be less force of friction. There will be less force of friction on a muddy track. On a muddy track, less force of friction on a muddy track. On a muddy track, less force of friction on a muddy track. Friction can also cause wear and tear of tires, and shoe soles get affected, undergo wear and tear. But tire wheels of the tire will go wear and tear. All kinds of ball bearings undergo wear and tear. So friction rolling friction is lesser than static friction.